2063 goals corresponding with the SDGs through the Africa Sustainable Development Report, the continent can monitor and evaluate progress made. We are now joined by Mr. Bartholomew Armah, who is the Chief Development Planning Section of the Macroeconomics and Governments Division, UNECA, who is part of the delegates that are reviewing the draft report here in FinTech. Good evening, sir, and welcome to the show.
Good evening.
All right. First things first, how imperative is the African report and how does it contribute to effective implementation of the continent's developmental agenda?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this station to discuss these issues. To get straight to the point, the SDG report, or the Africa Sustainable Development Report, provides our member states with an assessment of how they have done or fared on their performance on the Africans, on the SDGs, which is it's called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and Africa's agenda, which is also called the 2063 Agenda. This is a 63-year vision, but it's broken up into 6 10-year implementation periods. So the report tracks progress on both agendas. And so by doing that, policymakers can assess, am I doing well on these indicators and goals, and what do I need to do better to get things on track? And it also provides lessons learned, because some countries are doing well and have adopted certain initiatives that could be of use to others. And in an era of COVID, we have the COVID pandemic. We also have the Russia-Ukraine war. These events have really sort of nudged countries off their track, right? So this is a very important issue of the report, or edition of the report, because it allows countries to sit together and evaluate and take stock and strategize on how to move forward, and perhaps even adjust their development strategies to take into account these new developments.
All right. Now, during the review report, what are some of the gaps that you have identified, between the continents this far?
Okay. Without going into specific details, it's important. A number of factors have come out in terms of the trajectory of countries given the interruptions of the COVID pandemic. One, which is very important, and before I say that, the report is looking at 5 goals. The goal on gender, education, life below water, and life above water, as well as the global partnership to achieve these goals. So when we look at those goals, a number of things come up which are not very surprising. One, on education, for example, is the fact that the quality of education is not really on track in terms of how we're performing. But an important development has been the fact that because of COVID, a number of, most of our students were accessing educational services online. But we know that the poorer communities without access to internet were disproportionately affected adversely.
Yes.
So this has implications for inequality going forward, because if your education is really a key to exiting poverty, and if COVID has truncated the ability of low-income people to access education, then it means that they have to catch up, and it's going to have some repercussions going forward unless policies are put in place. Another issue that is coming up is that in the area of marine resources, we are polluting our marine resources, which is going to have implications for how we actually make use of these resources, because this also, marine resources are a source of development. So that is an important, a lot of plastic going into our marine resources. And this is also linked to the coastal areas, how they are developed and how activity along the coastal areas impacts on the marine. So life on land
Yes.
has implications for life underwater. And that is also critical. A third area is financing, right? Since COVID hit, the countries tapped into their own resources. At some point, it was about 44 billion. African countries mobilized about 44 billion, which is about 2% of their GDP to try to respond to this pandemic. The developed world, they have more access to resources. For them, it was about 20% of their GDP that was used to respond to the pandemic. Now, so a lot of countries were affected, rich countries and poor countries, right? I mean, the rich countries responded by basically pumping more resources into the system because they were affected. So it means
How
that...
How did the poor countries respond?
Well, poor countries, two things they did. They took a little money out of their own resources, their meager resources, because actually up to that time, poor countries were managing their economies fairly well. The macro stability was fairly good. Growth was positive but modest, I mean at 3%, 4%. So they had some resources, but that got depleted in their response. So what the rich countries did was they said, well, let us help the poorest countries. So they had a couple of initiatives. One was called the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, which said, well, we're going to give you a year or two, you don't pay your interest on your debt. But after that time, you have to do that. But even that was only for the poorest countries. And it was only for debt owed to it's what we call bilateral debt, where a country like a particular country will give you resources, will give you a loan and you pay back. It wasn't debt owed to, for example, the World Bank or the IMF. And it was only for low-income countries. So for countries like yours, which is a upper middle-income country, you did not benefit from that. But there was another initiative which was called the issuance of special drawing rights. And a special drawing right is a way of giving you money. So it's not currency, but it says once a country has it, it can actually access foreign currency.
Yes.
So, however, about 650 billion was issued for all countries, but the formula for allocation depends on the size of your economy. And so for Africa, Africa got 5% of that 650 billion, which is about 33 billion. And so that helped. On average, that comes up to about maybe 600 million or so per country. So, but looking at the kind of shocks that these countries experienced, that was really meager relative to the shocks. So that was important. But the question then is, from upper middle income countries like yours, there was a challenge in terms of how do you then get out of your challenges by accessing low interest loans. Because for you guys, for countries such as yours, you don't have really access to what's called concessionary financing, low interest loans. So that is a challenge that we've also identified. And we're trying to think about ways for countries to access low interest loans.
Okay. Mr. Armah, what are some of the corresponding goals from both these development agendas that Africa has made significant progress in?
Yeah, so you're asking now the areas that we've made progress in include the following. They're largely in the area of, for example, if you look at gender, access to the representation of women in parliament, that has been rising. It's currently around 25%, right, on average. Early child marriage, marriages of females below the age of 15 has also been declining, which is a positive thing. We also, if you look in the area of the environment, there's an indicator that looks at mountainous areas, maintaining the forest cover of mountainous areas. That Africa has done quite well in terms of progress on that.
Right.
And carbon emissions, I mean, although it's not really directly one of the indicators, goals we're looking at, is low, but the concern is that it is also rising.
All right.
So those are some of the bright spots that we can talk about. Unfortunately, largely because of the shocks that countries are experiencing.
Yes.
But it is also important to know that Africa does have what we call green endowments or reserves, such as when you look at minerals, cobalt, lithium, all of these minerals are potential inputs into the building of electric batteries, right, which is really the wave of the future. In addition, Africa has wetlands and peatlands. These are what you call carbon sinks, potential carbon sinks. And it's estimated that Africa's carbon sinks can absorb up to about 3 years of carbon emissions. So this is really an asset, right? But it's also a public good. What does that mean? It means that the benefits of absorbing this carbon dioxide, you're not only absorbing carbon dioxide that is directly within Africa's geographic space, right? It's benefiting everybody else.
Yes, unfortunately, Mr. Armah, we're running out of time. Any final remarks before we let you go?
Final remark is that Africa needs to monetize its natural green capital, such as these carbon sinks that I'm talking about. In other words, it needs to leverage them as a source of financing, right? Because if Africa is supporting the absorption of carbon dioxide, what is Africa getting back for that? So, and as we move into COP27, which is going to be in Egypt, this is maybe something that needs to be discussed.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. That was Mr. Bartholomew Armah joining us, who is one of the delegates who are part, that is, of course, of the AU Agenda 265 goal that is happening right now. Don't go anywhere. The Daily Roundup continues after this.